What if the wars you see on the news are only the surface story? The real battlefield is invisible, quiet rooms. It's balance sheets, interest rates, and printing presses humming behind closed doors, because here, it's the mystery most people never stop to question. How can governments afford wars that cost trillions of dollars, last for decades, and seemingly never require real sacrifice from those who authorize them? And why does the money never seem to run out when bombs are falling, but suddenly becomes scarce when it comes to schools, healthcare, or ordinary people's lives? To unravel this, we need to go back before the headlines, before modern conflicts, and even before central banks as we know them today, to understand how war finance evolved from kings literally running out of gold to a system where war can be funded almost infinitely. Not through taxes alone, but through debt, quietly absorbed by central banks, creating a hidden deal that reshaped history. In the earliest days of warfare, wars had hard limits. A king could only fight as long as he could tax his people or loot his enemies. And once the treasury was empty, the war ended, or the ruler fell, which meant war was constrained by reality itself. But as nation-states emerged and financial systems grew, more complex governments discovered something powerful: borrowing, which allowed them to fight today and pay tomorrow, and this shift accelerated dramatically in the 17th and 18th centuries, when institutions like the Bank of England were created specifically to finance war, marking one of the first moments where a central banking system and military ambition became deeply intertwined. The cause and effect was simple but profound. Wars required money, borrowing provided money, and centralized financial institutions made borrowing scalable, predictable, and politically convenient. Because instead of raising taxes immediately, which risked rebellion, governments could issue bonds, promise future repayment, and let financial elites profit in the meantime. As this system matured, the relationship grew tighter. Wars justified borrowing. Borrowing strengthened central banks, and central banks stabilized government debt markets, creating a feedback loop that rewarded expansion, not restraint. Fast forward to the 20th century, and this relationship reached a breaking point during World War I, when the sheer scale of industrialized war shattered any remaining link between gold, money, and military spending, forcing governments to suspend gold standards, print money, and rely heavily on central banks to absorb debt, a move sold as temporary but never fully reversed. World War II then cemented the model permanently. Central banks openly coordinated with governments to cap interest rates, monetize debt, and ensure that war production never slowed due to lack of funds, and the lesson learned by political leaders was unmistakable. With the right financial architecture, war no longer had to be paid for up front. It could be deferred, diluted, and hidden across generations. After the war, the public was promised peace dividends. But instead, the Cold War arrived, and with it a new justification for permanent military spending, where central banks played a quieter, but no less crucial role by maintaining liquidity, supporting government bond markets, and normalizing deficit spending as a feature rather than a flaw of modern governance. This is where the hidden deal truly took shape. Governments gained the ability to wage long, expensive conflicts without directly taxing citizens into revolt, while central banks gained expanded power, influence, and relevance by acting as the ultimate backstop for state spending, especially during crises conveniently defined as existential threats. The cause and effect chain tightened further in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, as wars in places like Vietnam, the Middle East, and beyond were financed not through war taxes but through deficits. While central banks kept interest rates low, absorbed debt directly or indirectly, reassured markets that government obligations were risk-free, even as total costs quietly ballooned into the trillions. The breaking point, however, began to emerge after the 2008 financial crisis, when central banks normalized extraordinary measures, quantitative easing, massive balance sheet expansions, and near-zero interest rates, initially to save the financial system. But soon, these tools became standard. And once a system proves it can create trillions of dollars digitally, with minimal immediate consequences, the political barrier to funding endless military operations effectively disappears. The fallout of this arrangement isn't immediate explosions or dramatic collapses. It's slow, corrosive, and harder to trace, showing up as inflation that erodes purchasing power, asset bubbles that benefit the already wealthy, and a growing disconnect between what citizens are told their governments can afford and what those governments somehow always find money for when war is on the table. Attempts to fix this system have repeatedly failed because they never address the core incentive problem. Politicians face short-term election cycles. Central banks claim political neutrality while enabling fiscal expansion. And the public bears the long-term cost through currency debasement rather than explicit taxation, which means accountability dissolves into complexity. When we connect this story to modern parallels, the pattern becomes almost impossible to ignore. Military budgets rise year after year, even in times of peace. Emergency spending becomes permanent. Central bank balance sheets expand alongside geopolitical tensions. And every new conflict is framed as unavoidable, urgent, and too dangerous to delay over concerns like debt or inflation. The shocking truth isn't just the numbers, though they are staggering it as the repetition. Crisis leads to spending. Spending leads to borrowing. Borrowing leads to central bank intervention. And intervention becomes the new normal, setting the stage for the next crisis. So what are we left with? First, understand that endless war spending isn't just a political choice. It's a financial system outcome designed to remove natural limits on power. Second, recognize that inflation and debt are not accidental side effects, but the predictable costs of funding wars without consent or transparency. And third, realize that as long as money can be created faster than accountability, conflicts will remain easier to start than to end. The warning is simple, but unsettling. A society that divorces war from immediate economic pain risks drifting into perpetual conflict without ever consciously choosing it. And the question we must sit with is whether we are willing to keep paying invisible costs for visible wars, or whether we finally demand a system where the true price of conflict is felt, debated, and understood before the first shot is fired. And if this perspective changed the way you see global events, consider subscribing, sharing this video, and staying curious, because the most important battles are often the ones you're never told are happening.